June 8th, 2020 of the Belton Independent School District Board of Trustees. A quorum of board members is present. We're meeting this evening under authority of Texas Government Code Section 551.045 and with the authority of the Governor's Office via video conference to advance the public health goal of limiting face-to-face meetings to slow the spread of coronavirus. I'd also like to thank our administration and our technology staff for making this technology possible for the board to meet in this manner. This meeting is being live streamed on the board's YouTube channel and recorded. The recording will be made available to the public. Additionally, members of the public who seek to exercise their right under state law to address the board on an item on the agenda for tonight's meeting have the ability to do so in the manner listed on the notice for this meeting. Public comments is the next item on our agenda. As I noted a moment ago, to comment on an item on the agenda for today's board meeting, members of the public were instructed to submit their comments to be read into the record. Elizabeth, would you please read any comments that were received from members of the public?
No comments were submitted.
Thank you, Ms. Elizabeth. And so we'll just move right on into our agenda, our board workshop. Our first presenter is going to be Jennifer Lane and Todd Schiller. They're going to talk to us about budget and compensation plan. I yield the floor.
Good evening, everyone. Board members, Dr. Smith, I hope you all are doing well. Just going to go ahead and jump right in. I'm going to actually present on the first section of the budget and compensation plan discussion, and then Todd Schiller is going to jump in toward the end. Next slide. The purpose of this presentation is to provide you as board members with the relevant and reliable information that you need to make the informed decisions that are necessary regarding budgeting and compensation. So we're going to go into an overview, and I always start with our budget priorities. And the main priority that I want to point out tonight is the one that is associated with maintaining comparable salary and benefits packages for employees, because that's why we're here. We're going to talk about the compensation for employees and how that is impacting the budget. So next slide. I thought I'd give you a little bit of a background in terms of the state revenue, because you've heard me stand up or you've heard me sit here over Zoom and say that we are anticipating that it's going to be a challenging year or a couple of years ahead of us, possibly due to the pandemic that we're currently in. And I wanted to give you the background as to why we keep saying that, but also to show you where the things could turn around as well. So when you look at state revenue sources, the biggest source of revenue comes from sales taxes. And then the next largest portion of state revenue comes from motor vehicle related taxes. And then you've heard some talk about the oil and natural gas production taxes that the state relies on. And then there's a small portion related to the franchise tax and lottery proceeds. Next slide. When talking about the state budget, so we just talked about the revenue piece, but where does the state allocate funds to? If you look at this slide, public education is about 1/3 of all of the state's budget. And then when you add in the health and human services component at another 34%, that means about 2/3 of the state's budget is allocated toward the services for health and human services as well as public education. So those are the primary allocated services that the state is funding with the revenue that is generated. Next slide. So when you look at the state budget and why we're saying what we're saying regarding where we could be, there are a couple of reasons for that, or a few reasons for that. One is that revenue is strained because sales tax collections are down significantly. We are not buying as much as we would have been had we not been in this pandemic. So with sales tax making up such a large portion of the state budget, revenue definitely is being impacted. And then with the oil and gas industry being hit hard, and with oil prices being low, the amount of income generated through oil and gas is also low. But then you also have to look at the costs associated with the state's budget. And when you look at the demand for state services during this time, that demand has increased because during the economic downturn, people are relying more heavily on the services that are provided by the state. And then when you look at House Bill 3 in school districts, the state put a lot of money into House Bill 3 and making sure that public education was funded. And as we move into future years, the amount of money necessary to sustain House Bill 3 is scheduled to increase due to tax rate compression, as well as some other components of House Bill 3. So that's why we are saying that we believe that we could experience some difficult times ahead, but that does not necessarily mean that we are. Next slide. We're receiving a few mixed signals over the past few months. We have heard from our commissioner that budget cuts are less likely in the future years, but then we've also heard from him that we have been impacted substantially by the COVID-19 pandemic. And so he's asking us to be conservative in our budgeting. And on our legislative side, the Committee on Public Education, the Chairman Huberty sent out a letter to the entire Public Ed Committee saying that they are committed to funding House Bill 3 and holding school districts harmless. And they have put some measures in place to make sure or try to sustain House Bill 3. And on the flip side of that, we know that the governor and Huberty, I'm sorry, not Huberty, I completely lost it. Lieutenant Governor Patrick, as well as Speaker Bonin, sent out a letter to the state agencies asking them to cut 5% of their revenue. So we are experiencing some mixed signals, and that has led us to basically try to, for lack of a better phrase, draw a line in the sand and say, this is where we are, this is where we believe we are going, and we're trying to take the best of both worlds, and while also being realistic.
Jennifer, can I add real quick? And just so you all know, our Lieutenant Governor joined one of our commissioner phone calls with superintendents not too long ago and spoke to us all. And again, to Jennifer's point, his message to us was real clear that day, that when they passed House Bill 3, they were committed to sustaining the funding for House Bill 3 and the school funding for the future. On the flip side of that, we hear all of the economic predictions and stuff, and we're told by our commissioner we need to be very conservative in our budgeting estimates for the future. So to her point, I support it fully. We hear mixed signals from our elected officials and our appointed officials pretty often.
Next slide. So budgeting for 2021 fiscal year is sort of like that iceberg effect. There are things that we can reasonably estimate, and those things such as salaries, property values, our debt service payments, ADA, that's kind of on the line because there are some knowns as well as unknowns regarding ADA. But what you'll notice is the things that are above the line, those are primarily expense related, not necessarily the drivers for our state funding, which those things below the line, our state funding in and of itself is sort of I would say in flux, or there are some unknowns about it, simply because we don't know how some things are going to be interpreted, such as, our enrollment. That's kind of cyclical, or that's variable right now, because we anticipate having kids, but we don't necessarily know what that's going to look like in terms of who we're going to be teaching, whether we're going to be in the classroom, or whether or not we're going to have kids who just feel more comfortable staying home. Also, with the interest rates being volatile, interest income is uncertain. We can estimate what our property values are going to be with a little bit of certainty, but when it comes to tax collections, that is one of those variables that impact our funding, that we definitely don't know what that's going to look like. Will families be able to pay their taxes? That's a question that we're still, trying to find an answer to. And one of the things I did put on here that people often don't think about is meals served in the cafeteria, because that affects our school nutrition funding. And if we don't serve a lot of meals in the cafeteria, our reimbursements are not as high as we hope, and that will generate less funding for us. Next slide. So here is something that we put together to try to give you an idea of where we are, where we could be headed. There are a lot of assumptions built into this model. So many that I listed a few at the bottom, but this model is based on, for the most part, if we don't really take a lot of action to change anything. So I want you to keep that in mind as we go through these numbers. So let me just talk about the assumptions first. When you look at the M&O tax rate in 2021, that is assuming a low tax rate based on the fact that our property values are higher than we had anticipated. And then in the out years, it's a calculation that I came up with to try to hold us harmless in terms of increasing tax collections and decreasing property values. So again, coupled with property value growth, that 2020, we're using preliminary values, and in other years, it's a 3% growth. And I said a decreasing property value growth. I'm sorry, I meant tax collections, because remember, if you recall, we have that revenue cap on our tax rate moving forward. So I tried to take that into consideration. There's a funding model that I use, but just know that if values increase more than 3%, the tax collections will go up, and then state funding will go down. So those two are now, they work in an inverse relationship immediately, whereas in prior years, we had that 1-year lag. So if you take those two together, it doesn't have a big impact on our budget any longer. And I think I previously said that we've gotten almost to the point where, tax collections and property values are at a moot point for our state aid. It's really based on our increase in enrollment. And with that, property tax collections, I estimated at 98% moving forward, whereas I have always or typically used 100%. But given the fact that we do anticipate that we will see fewer families being able to meet the tax obligation, that's why the collection percentage was decreased. With ADA, we chose the moderate model simply because we believe that students will be here. I don't want to be too aggressive and say that we're going to realize the full amount of the demographer's projections for 21 fiscal year. Now in the out years, 2022 and fiscal year 23, we have projected the remainder of the demographers' growth in those numbers. And also included in the state aid, I have projected the new instructional facilities allotment at $1,000 per kid. And for fiscal year 21, I estimated 900 students, and that includes Lake Belton High School and Charter Oaks' second year of growth. We do get NIFA funds for the second year of the school being open, but we get that money based on the additional students at the campus. So I estimated that at about 900 students. And then for 21-22, I estimated an additional 350 students at Lake Belton High School. Again, our NIFA funding is important because that's $1,000 per student. So for every 1,000 students, that's about $1 million in additional state aid. So with those 900 students, it's an estimated 900,000, and with the 350 students, an estimated $350,000 in state funding. And these estimates are based on current legislative laws that were in effect for the 1920 fiscal year. And we anticipate that with the legislature convening, there could be some changes there coming up. And one important thing to note is that in the 2021 fiscal year and the 21-22, 22-23, this is assuming that all budgeted funds are fully expended. So what that means is this is saying that we will spend every dime that we are budgeting. We know that that's typically not the case. One of the things that I usually try to do is allow for a 3% variance in expenditures. So when you look at that net change in fund balance and it's a negative amount, it may look concerning, but I just want to point out that that $2.7 million is a 2% change or a 2% variance from total expenditures. And in the 22 fiscal year, that $5.4 million is a 4% variance, and the 22-23 fiscal year is a 4.6% variance. So when you look at the budget as a total, those negative amounts are really small in comparison to the total budget. So let me just back up and go to the 1920 projected budget. Again, this is just an estimate as of May 31st. So if you look at the changes, you will notice that the biggest change is that we have gone from a net zero change in fund balance to adding about $2.6 million in fund balance. That $2.6 million is predicated on the fact, or predicated on several things. One being that we don't really have any more initiatives that we take out of the expense side. And it's also based on not having a lot of additional operational costs for this fiscal year. So it's based on the fact that because of the pandemic, we are going to save some money. However, we have been, at least I have been encouraging departments to spend their budget dollars on items to make sure that they are ready for the next fiscal year and or replace things that need to be replaced at this time, to try to set ourselves up for the coming fiscal years. One thing that I want to jump to in the 2021 moderate estimate is if you look at our salaries and benefits, we have taken that, I've taken that number, and that's based on this current year 1920 salaries. There is an increase in there for anticipated increase in expenditures. And then I want to draw your attention to the additional positions and the raises. These are the things that Todd Schiller is going to be talking to you about next. But I do want to highlight the fact that the items that he's going to talk to you about, they are already in the 2021 budget for your consideration. And the full effect of those items are in this estimate right now. And again, if you look at that net change in fund balance of the 2.7 million, that's a 2% variance from the original budget. So it's highly likely that even though we have a negative amount for that next change, for the net change in fund balance, that we won't necessarily end that way.
So Jennifer, can I jump in real quick? So I think this is a good pausing point to have the board and ask any questions that they have along the way on this. Our whole goal in getting this started was to paint a picture for you of budget considerations and initial budget planning before we start to talk about the compensation plan moving forward. And again, this was all done so you can feel well informed for your June 15th board meeting coming up. But board, what kind of questions do you have based on what Jennifer has presented so far regarding budget?
I do not have any. Does the rest of the board have any questions? I see Chris's hand.
Yeah, I just maybe a couple of clarifications, right? So I guess I missed this when I was reading the pre-packet. So just to clarify, so the 20 to 21 estimate is at 50% of the demographer's estimate, but for 21 and 20, for the 21, 22 and 22, 23, that's at their full projection. Okay. And then when we look at the fund balance projection, I think our stated goal or target is to try to keep it around 25%, right? Is that what we've said there, where the board has set the target?
It's 20 to 25%.
20 to 25%, okay. Okay.
And that, just to clarify, that's the way it reads in local policy, if I'm not mistaken, right. Correct, Jennifer?
Correct.
Right. Okay.
And just a reminder that we knew we were going over that 25% in the previous years, but that was intentional because we planned to use some of the funds to help open Lake Belton High School and Belton Middle School. But House Bill 3 gave us a lot of relief, so we have not had to do that.
Right. And so if we were to look at like 21, 22, and 22, 23 at a more conservative head count, I mean, that would certainly impact us both on the revenue side and the expense side, right? I would imagine we wouldn't also have the amount of salaries that would go with that as well, right? So, okay. All right, I mean, I think I'm good for right now.
And you will see that even in 23 fiscal year, our fund balance as a percent of expenditures is still over the 20%. Right. Our percent of personnel is a little bit higher, but again, this is assuming that we are spending every dollar that we have. Mm-hmm. And we do have what we call a vacancy factor that lowers our salary amounts each year.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Suzanne, may I go ahead?
Suzanne, you're muted, just so you know.
I know, I clicked and I double clicked, and go right ahead, Manuel. You do a great job. I've done some wonderful things here in these last couple of seconds.
Jennifer, when you were talking about and you may have answered this question when you were giving your presentation, but this is really the only second time I've ever actually looked at a budget. When you mentioned the variance and the net change in fund balance, 2% followed by 4% and then 4.6%. At what time what percentage does that become a concern?
Great question. I like to keep it around the 3% range. So when I start getting up over to the 4 or 5%, that's when I really take a good look at it. But in this estimate, I'm not concerned about that 4% because this is assuming that administration is not taking any steps to address expenses or increase revenue. So when you look at it here, there are some, there are other factors that could come into play with expenses decreasing or revenue increasing, because I still think this is for 21, 22 and 22, 23. I still think this estimate is just that. It's an estimate. When I bring this to you next year, these numbers may not look anything like this, but I wanted you all to get a picture of where we could possibly be if, one, we did nothing, and two, if the legislature did nothing.
Okay. And you also mentioned, you made a comment about this variance, that it will not necessarily end up that way. So does that mean that this 2% variance in 2021, could we end up breaking even or no?
We could end up breaking even. We could end up putting money into fund balance, or depending on what happens next year, it could go up. But if you look back at historically, I think we had a revenue short budget last year, and we ended up putting a large amount of money into fund balance. Okay.
So when you see a 2% variance and looking at these things historically, that's not a major concern.
No,
okay.
It's not. And this is something that we monitor throughout the year as well. And again, I wish I had that crystal ball, but I know that we would be having a completely different conversation right now if it were not for the pandemic that we're currently in. But since we are in this pandemic, we are still trying to give a reasonable estimate. Again, there are factors that could happen that could change this either up or down.
Okay, like the property tax collections could be less than 98%.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Or
Okay,
they could be more.
all right, thank you. That's all I have.
Does the board have any other questions? I think we're all good. You have anything else, Jennifer or Todd? Do you want to move on to yours?
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you. Next slide, and I think Todd is up.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. Good evening, everyone. To start out, I would like to say in developing a proposal for this year's compensation, obviously we've been working closely with Jennifer and her team. We've also been looking at reviewing surrounding districts and districts within our enrollment range to determine an appropriate increase that we can recommend for your approval that is in line with our goals and the budget. I want to start by going through our teacher salary schedule first. So we'll go to the next slide. So last year, as you know, we provided some historical increases in the district, and we provided teacher salary increases from 6 to 9%. This increase was significant for our teachers and was in line with the legislation that was passed with House Bill 3. As you remember, looking back to last month and when we were reviewing our teacher salary schedule and the compensation survey, the area that we always focus on is that beginning teacher salaries. And so when you look at beginning teacher salaries, we're currently at $50,002. And considering other districts, we're anticipating that salary increase at beginning teacher salaries to be very slight. And so our proposal would be to move that 0-year teacher salary from $50,200 to $50,500. If you also think back to the May conversation with our salary survey, we also pointed out a couple of areas and experience categories that we were lower in. In particular, that was years 10 and year 15. At year 10, we were $1,250 below the highest paid district. And at year 15, we were $1,225 behind the lowest paid district. And so when we were thinking about that and how to address those things within our salary schedule, we decided to kind of look at our step differences and went with this increasing our step differences, starting with the year 5 to year 6 mark. and increasing that to $500 per step. And you can see those step differences in the last column on your screen. And you can compare those to the second column on your screen to the current year step differences. So you can see there at year 5 to year 6, our current step difference increase is $325. And the proposal would be that we would take that to $500. What this does is this increases the salary dollars on each one of those steps as you go down the experience chart. And so that puts more salaries into those areas where we're lower in at the year 10 and year 15 marks and those middle years. These changes would result in salary increases resulting in $500 to $2,175, depending on which experience level and which step that you're on. And you can see those total increase amounts right there in the middle part of your screen. I'll also point out that, remember, this is a hiring schedule. And when individuals come in, they do not come in below that red line that you see there. So we have a hiring schedule that goes to year 24. And so individuals that have more than 24 years of experience get hired in at that year 24 mark. And that's how most, if not all, districts handle that when they have their hiring schedules out there. But I did include those areas below that red line so you can kind of see what happens with staff beyond the year 24s once they move up from every year from being hired in. Next slide. So if you think back into our clerical and paraprofessional schedules, as a reminder, we talked last month about them contributing to Social Security and to TRS, both of those things, and how that's a little bit different than what other districts do. As we consider this, and we look back to that survey that we shared in May, educational aids are the ones that were kind of the highest priority for us. They're the ones with the market median that was well below the 90% at 86, 87% of the market. And so when we're looking at our paraprofessional schedules, we specifically looked at those educational aids and those positions, including the library aides. And so you can see in red there's 2 positions on pay grade 3, educational aides and library digital information assistant positions. Those were previously pay grade 2 positions. And so we are recommending that those positions move to a pay grade 3 and their salaries be aligned within the salary structure that you see there between the boxes of $11.78 and $17.68 per hour. This, we feel that creating this minimum and maximum salary structure will kind of align their salaries better with market and put them pretty close, if not a little bit over that 100% of the market median. And will also help out with average salaries too. So they will receive an adjustment in their salary to move to that pay grade 3. And we're talking about the educational aides and those library digital information assistants. And they would also receive the salary increase that we would do for all other paraprofessionals, which would be a proposal of 3% of the midpoint increase. And you can see that midpoint dollar amount right in the middle of each one of those boxes. And so it'd be 3% of those annual salary dollars that you see there. So we feel like those 2 things together will help move our educational aides and paraprofessional staff along. The reason why we would do the adjustment and the paraprofessional adjustment is because these salaries currently are being compared with current salaries that are happening and doesn't take into consideration salaries that other districts may be considering at this time that is not out yet. So this kind of adjusts them to the current market and keeps them going within the market based on what other districts may be doing. Next slide, you'll see a continuation of that current paraprofessional pay schedule. Again, no other positions highlighted in red there, but these positions also would receive a 3% increase as well, based on that.
Just for clarification purposes, we also, one of the challenges we have is the retention rate of specifically educational aides, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, so educational aides right now, we're about 25.6% turnover every year. So that's significant. And we got to figure out what we can do to address those things.
And I bring that up just for the board to consider in this, in the compensation plan. We know that compensation isn't everything, but compensation does matter to our staff. And for some of these positions, if you think about the critical nature of the position and supporting, for example, our students with special learning needs and stuff, and we have a 25% turnover in that group, that doesn't provide the stability that we might need for those students in an educational environment sometimes. So just pointing that out for the retention rate concerns that we have as well.
Absolutely.
You mind if I make a quick comment there too? Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, to echo that, right? I think taking care of the educational aids, certainly from a salary standpoint, may certainly help the turnover piece of it. But I think it's bigger than that, right? Because if we take care of the educational aids and can correct some of that turnover, the classroom teachers also see the benefit in that, right? So I think that pays forward many times, you know, when you look at that. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Yeah, that's a great point, Chris, and you're absolutely correct. Next slide. So this is our auxiliary pay schedule. Again, thinking back to the compensation survey that we shared in May, there was one position in particular that we were looking at, and that was our food service workers. The food service workers were the lowest in terms of the market median out of all of the comparison group. The difference with food service workers is they're not paid from local funds. And so they are having a lot of impact right now with the COVID-19 and some impact on their funding. So while we need to look at the food service positions for an adjustment, we need to wait and see what happens with their funding with the COVID-19 impact before we make any kind of determination on that. So at this time, we're not recommending we move pay grades for those food service workers or other positions. And with the food service workers, we need to monitor those, determine the impact of the funding before we determine a pay increase for those. So we're going to watch that throughout this year. Don't know when we'll know exactly the impact of COVID-19 on those food service funding, but that is something that we will continue to watch. Like the paraprofessionals, these positions also contribute to Social Security as well. And so we want to provide a little bit higher increase like we did on the paraprofessional schedule. And that midpoint increase would be 3%, just like it was on the paraprofessional salary schedule. Next slide. So as we turn back to kind of thinking about our exempt positions, this slide here shows you a comparison of our administrative positions. This slide, and actually the next slide too, shows you a comparison of our administrative positions and how they compare with markets in the 12 to 17,000 enrollment, with districts in the 12 to 17,000 enrollment. And so all of those numbers that you see in red there are positions or numbers that are below 90% of the market median. And so we're trying to figure out how we're able to attract and retain staff for individuals in these positions to be able to compete with districts in that 12 to 17,000 enrollment area. And there are several of them, as you can see, that are highlighted in red there that fall below that 90% of the market median. Next slide. And that's just a continuation of those positions as well. And you can see the additional positions with those reds. Next slide. So on this slide, this is kind of what we've been thinking about in terms of administrative and professional. So that 6 to 9% increase that we discussed with teachers, providing an increase of that amount created some compression between the two schedules. Especially at these pay positions on the pay grade 2 and the pay grade 3. And so when we look at administrative and professional positions, we are recommending a 2% increase on midpoint. And we hope that 2% increase, and based on those teacher increases from 500 to 2175, hopefully will provide a little bit of separation, depending on years of experience, but provide some separation between these pay grades and create again, some more separation between those two types of positions. Next slide.
Todd, can I ask just a clarifying question? If we can go back to that last one real quick. Can you just give us an example of why that's important for us to consider and why we need to separate that out a little bit?
Yeah, so number one, market does it. And so when we have teachers that show interest in becoming counselors or facilitators or coaches, or pursue a special ed route, if they're a special ed teacher and want to become a diagnostician or LSSP. Right now, there's not much pay difference between those types of positions, but the responsibilities are different. And the market warrants a higher level of pay for that. And so if you're moving a teacher to one of those positions, there's not much pay separation right now for that. So there's not much incentive for looking at teachers and going to those positions, or much consideration for teachers to go into those positions. So that's the reason why that needs to be a focus as we continue to move forward.
Thank you.
Yep. Next slide. So that administrative review of the 12 to 17,000 enrollment. And so when we look at those positions that are below that 90% of that market median, the way we feel we can address this is to look at those positions and move some pay grades and pay grade structures to align them better with those 12 to 17,000 enrollment districts. And so what you're seeing here is those positions in red would move up in pay grade. And I have previously the pay grade that they were on. But what this does is it moves those basically associate principal, elementary principal, and directors and above up pay grades, and kind of restructures their pay grade alignments. And it does create 2 additional pay grades just through the domino effect. And that's pay grade 10 and pay grade 11 there. All the numbers that you see in red on the range boxes, those are new ranges that get created within this. And the blacks are just the 1%. So typically what we do with salary structures is, given no pay grade adjustments, we increase salary ranges 1% every year to keep up, because you don't want your salary schedules to become stagnant. So we kind of move the ranges a little bit as increases in salaries increase as well. But you can see there, those are the positions there that would receive a pay grade adjustment, proposed pay grade adjustment. And it does create those 2 additional levels at pay grade 10 and pay grade 11. Next slide. So in doing that, these are the things in red are those same positions that we had on that previous slide, a couple slides ago, that were below 90% of that market median. And so when you take into those new salary ranges that were represented in the previous slide, and you apply those to the 12 to 17,000 enrollment districts, you can see what that does. And it puts us in a far better position to be able to track staff from those 12 to 17,000 enrollment areas, because everybody's pretty much above, for the most part, 90% of that market median. And so that does put us into a better position long-term to be able to attract and recruit staff. Next slide. And that's just a continuation of those positions. Again, you see those in red, they're now approaching above 90%, and some of them are right around the 100% mark. Next slide. So moving away from the salary structures a little bit, we've also looked at stipends. We do a stipend review every other year, and we look at stipends. These stipends here are stipends that we also look at market median for this as well. These stipends are stipends that were below 90% market median. And so the recommendation would be to provide these increases and get them more in line with what our local districts are doing. There are some positions or some stipends that are not on here. Like when you think about swimming and volleyball, those stipends are currently already at the level of 100% market median. And so that's the reason why we don't have all the positions on there. It's really about that market median and those that fall behind, and how do we get these positions adjusted to make sure we're competitive and be able to attract staff. And the final slide, I believe. And so this, and you see that 2.906 million number there at the bottom in red, that's that number that Jennifer has utilized on her projection sheet. But you do see here the teachers, librarians, and nurses, that cost there for the adjustments, 1,046,000. Administrative professional numbers, and that's that 2% number of 314,770. And then those adjustments we talked about would be 454,399. And those are those positions on that administrative professional pay schedule that were highlighted in red that would be adjusted. And then the clerical paraprofessional positions, that 3% increase would total 239,757. The adjustments for those educational aides, and there's significant adjustments for those individuals because we're well below the market, is $534,387. And then the auxiliary adjustments at 3%, 266,770. And then you can see the stipend adjustments that were recommended on the previous slide, 50,000. And so that brings that total up to 2.906. That concludes the presentation, but I'm more than happy to answer any questions. Kind of get your feel if this is kind of what you're thinking. Also, kind of like to put the question out there is where do y'all see us in our position in the market, and how we attract staff long-term wise. So we kind of need to figure out kind of where we want to compete in the market, at what level.
Thanks, Todd. Does the board have any questions?
Hey, so always get interesting messages and calls sometimes from different people. And someone messaged me last week that the rumor was that our administrators were going to get a 7% increase, but on the chart it says 2.1. So if I answer that question, I can say 2.1 for administrative, and I'm correct on that?
So some of those administratives would, like those that we talked about pay grade adjustments for those individuals. Some of that would be greater than that 2.1. That 2.1 you're seeing there is total cost for current cost to the cost increase based on that 2% increase. So it does not include that 2.1% is really the current salary cost and the proposed salary cost before the adjustments. And so there is a 2.1% increase in that cost increase. The salary adjustments are not included in that percentage calculation.
Ty, I think that's a really good point. And that's one of the worries that we wanted to be able to have a very open and frank conversation with the board in all of this. So there's a couple of things in here. There's two things that we're doing with this compensation proposal. The first is talking about providing raises, and those raises are based on what people are making now. But then there's a couple of things that we've noticed in our actual salary schedules when we compare to some of the other markets. And we feel like there's a thoughtful investment that we probably need to make in some of our staff. And here's exactly why. I'm very conservative by nature, and I can tell you I'm concerned by it. But one of the things that I've come to see by going through this with Todd and Jennifer is that we are behind the market with some of our key leadership positions in the district. And I'm going to take an example of elementary principals right now. We have a challenge actually getting recruiting pools for elementary principal positions right now based on our salary structure. And so if we don't sometime figure out a way to not only attract candidates, but also keep them and retain them, one of the worries I have as a superintendent is I don't want a leadership churn in the middle of these next coming years when we're going through trying to figure out all this, the budget implications that Jennifer talked about in the previous part of this. So I lay that out there for you all so that we can have good, open, honest dialogue, because I know that there are some districts that are doing the same type of thing that we are proposing here today. And I know that other districts are saying we are going through a hiring freeze and we are not doing any kind of salary increases or any kind of salary scale adjustments at all. And so hence the reason why I think we wanted to have this conversation with the board tonight is we feel like as a leadership team, it's a good time to invest in our staff to keep stability and thoughtful leadership throughout our system. But we know that there are other opinions on that. So that's why we wanted to have this conversation.
Appreciate that, Matt. Have we looked from the top down to ensure that we have all the necessary positions? I've noticed we got a lot of directors in the top, just to make sure that we have everything that we need here at Belton ISD.
In terms of staffing, is that your question, Suzanne?
Right.
Yes, I think so. And that's something that we're going to need to be looking at as we approach the next coming years, especially if there's budget cuts and those types of things. It's just the level of positions and kind of comparison of, in other districts, do you see that many director types of positions? That's something that we're just going to have to be ongoing as we get resignations and kind of review through what level of position is really needed to be able to do the type of work that's being done. But I do think the staff that we have now is needed in some capacity to be able to perform like we're performing.
And Suzanne, one thing adding on to that, I'll say real quickly too, I don't know exactly how all this is going to come out in the next year and exactly what schooling is going to look like. And so there might be a situation where we have to add a position or two along the way. But with the margin that I think Jennifer has built in and Todd has done with his studies, I think that we will thoughtfully add those positions and not add those on a whim.
Thank you. I appreciate all the due diligence that you all are doing to ensure that we're, if we're not at market, we're getting close to ensure that our staff is compensated in a way that they deserve.
Thank you. And I will point out something I didn't mention on the administrative and professional schedule. When you think back to that survey that we did in May, as Matt said, that elementary principal and high school principal were areas that we pointed out, and this does fix those issues and puts them more competitive in that market median range.
Hey, Todd.
Yeah.
And I don't expect to have this answer right now. I'm not, hey, do you know this? But I think something that'd be important for us to know is if we look at the total amount that we're going to spend on increases in salaries and adjustments and all that, how much of that increase is on campus? I think that's an important thing for us to know and point out, because like I said, as I spoke with Matt a week or so ago, we have woefully underpaid principals, and we have a problem with that right now. And it showed up in experience, and when people get experience, they're leaving because they can make more money somewhere else. But I do think we need to have an idea about that is, the aides, those are in classroom. So I think we just need to know as a board, that's an important thing for us to be able to know and say, hey, yeah, we did, this is what we're spending in increases. Oh, by the way, 87%, 90% of that is in classroom, on campus. And I think that's important for our community to know that that's where we spend the bulk of our dollars. And even on these increases, that's where they're going.
Absolutely. Good point. We can definitely share that information out. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Chris, did you have something?
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Jeff. And so, maybe I think you asked Todd, sort of maybe for a pulse check on, is this the right philosophy to get where we want to go? And I would say from my perspective, absolutely, right? I think we're going to figure out what the community wants out of our educational system, right? But I can guarantee it's not going to be second best, right? Like nobody's going to ask for second best, right? And so we don't get to be the best and world class without having the caliber of person that we need to do that, in that role, right? So from a philosophy standpoint, right, here's one pulse is checked, right? So when I do look at this, I'm just going to kind of think out loud. I don't know where I fall on some of this yet, right? But a couple of things just kind of struck me funny, right? And so some of this may be popular, some might be unpopular, right? But when I look at the head football coaches, and this is nothing against the head football coaches, but they're a grade above our head academic coaches, right? As directors for all of the curriculum programs. I don't know how I feel about that yet. I understand looking at benchmarks and being competitive and things like that. But then also looking at, well, what's the ultimate mission of what we're trying to do? I don't know where I fit there yet. And then in that level 7 grouping, there's a lot of positions potentially going like 3 and 4 jumps. And so, if we look at the long game here, is there a middle stop along the way? I don't know. Does this have to be if we pull the trigger all at once? I don't know that it does, but I'm sort of marinating on some of this still. And I think Jeff's perspective a minute ago, I think was a good perspective to kind of take into that too. So I don't know. Again, thinking out loud, I don't necessarily have any questions there, but.
Yeah, those are all great points, and I can address, I think, both of them. Those on those pay grade 7, where they're having a couple of pay grade movements. In the past, we've had those directors of support services areas at a different pay grade than you see some of those other director positions. But when you look at market and you look at especially that 12 to 17,000 enrollment district, you don't see that difference in separation of pay grades and when you look at the minimums and maximums. So that's the reason there for the consolidation of all those director positions onto that one pay grade. The head football coach, you're exactly right. I mean, that's an interesting conversation. But that's market. And so in order to be able to be competitive and attract and retain or attract staff from other districts and be able to pay what a competitive rate, that's what the market's doing. Get the point completely. I wish we could pay everybody, you know, a higher dollar amount, but at some point you gotta lean towards market to figure out what you need to do. Good points.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Go ahead, May. Go ahead, Ty.
I just want to say, you know, in this time that we're experiencing, I appreciate the fact that we are seeing raises. I also have been a business owner for almost 15 years, and I've always paid my employees higher than market value to keep the best subcontractors that I could have. And it shows in the product that I put out there. I've always been proud of that. So those two things go hand in hand. And I've been looking at the principal salaries for a while, the elementary principal salaries. And I do think that is a neat area right there. And I'm very appreciative of the increases that we're seeing there. But I'm proud that you and Jennifer are able to provide these raises during a time where we have all this uncertainty. It shows our employees, even in the times we can't even describe, that we're still there. We got their back, and we're going to make sure that they're compensated at the highest levels that we can. And we're also taking care of our stakeholders in our district. I think they're, you know, with these crazy property valuations that came out this year, I think everybody's worried about increased taxes because some people's property values went up 200%. Makes no sense. So I think people are really looking at that pretty closely. So I think you guys have been able to keep everything in perspective and grow our salaries at a healthy rate and close the gap in some areas in our paraprofessionals and our hourly people. So I think you guys have hit all the marks with this. Honestly, I think you guys have done a good job.
Appreciate that, Ty.
Thanks, Ty. Manuel, did you have something?
Yes, ma'am. Man, I think this is probably more for you than Todd. You had mentioned earlier when Jennifer was doing her talk that we're getting mixed signals from state leadership as to what's going to happen next year. And with the situation that we're in with this pandemic and the uncertainty with that, and then how this has affected property values and then potential collections dropping down next year, how much weight was given to all those considerations? You know, when you have the local taxpayer saying, well, wait a minute, why are we doing that in a situation like this? Is it a good time to do that? Understanding that we're trying to keep up with market conditions and then to retain the best people we possibly can, especially in some of those key positions. How much weight was given to those considerations and coming up with this proposal?
I apologize. I was on mute. I can tell you I lost sleep over it. I can tell you that I think Jennifer and Todd have as well. And that's again why we wanted to have this conversation with you. We actually believe that the more minds and more thoughts that we can have in this discussion, the better off it will be. My eventual decision making in this was a couple of things. One, it goes back to what you all did with your fund balance over the past few years. And it's something that we've all talked about in the past, is when is the appropriate time to use fund balance on some of these topics. I think sometimes we get into the mode as public educators and believing that we have to add to fund balance when I think that we are called to use some of our money to make sure that our employees and our students are receiving the highest educational quality product that we can possibly provide. In this time where I'm worried about that moving forward, I believe for me, the thing that drove me to this recommendation is that the best thing that we can possibly invest in is our people. And it is our people that are going to help lead us through some of the challenging times. So when I look at that and I see that our fund balance is still within the local policy that you all have set up of 20 to 25%, even a few years down the road, and I think about what is the most important thing that we can do. And from my mind in all of this in an unknown time, it's to provide stability for our leaders and for our staff. And if we're able to do those things, that'll help us really address consistency in the student educational experience. So that's what led me to that. it was really student driven and how can we provide the best quality product for kids? And I feel like investing in our staff, and I get it. Some people are going to say that's counterintuitive. I totally understand that right now. But I think you've also, Todd can probably list off districts around the state that are approaching it the similar way that we presented tonight, and others that are going in an exact opposite way. And so hence the reason for this discussion.
I agree with all that, Matt. Thank you.
I just want to say thank y'all. Thank you to Matt and Jennifer and Todd and everybody who works so closely on that and make sure that the numbers are right. And thanks for caring for our employees.
Thanks, Janet. Okay. You have anything else on this particular subject?
The only thing that I will say is this, is that if you have any questions for Todd, Jennifer, or myself, please let us know. Our goal in having this workshop tonight and spending this hour was to have you feel well prepared and informed for a thoughtful potential approval of compensation plan coming up on Monday. So if there's questions that you have, this gives us the opportunity to really address those things prior to next Monday. So please let us know on that one.
Okay, great. Well, thanks again, Jennifer and Todd. Appreciate all that good information. And thank you all for such a healthy discussion. We're ready to move into the next portion. I believe we probably need to take just a couple of minute break, if that's okay. Everyone just mute your mic and stop your video. We'll come back it's 6:01. We'll be back by 6:06. Did we get everyone back? Okay, looks like we did. If you all are ready and have no objections, we're ready to move into the next portion of our workshop. We get to talk about goals.
I know you've been waiting to talk about goals for a long time, so I'm really excited about this, and I'm going to do my best to do this projection right. I am sharing my screen with you all so you all can see, and we will do a projection for you all so that you can see this presentation. While there might be a few slides, I can promise you we're going to go through them kind of quick. It won't take too long. I'm going to get us kicked off, and then I'm going to have Deanna and Vicki Dean join us and talk to us a little bit specifically about the House Bill 3 things. Our purpose for the time tonight on this is really to engage in some discussion and dialogue about goals for the upcoming school year. And I want to point out the 3 things that I believe these goals really help us do. 1 is set direction for the school district. 2 is ensure some alignment in what we're doing in the school district. And then 3, it's the foundation for you as a board of trustees to evaluate me as a superintendent. So these goals help serve a couple of purposes for us for the school district. Our goal development process that we got rolling this year was to start talking about it back in April. We had the May 6th time with TASB and our consultant talking about goals. We started gathering some feedback from y'all, and that was either written or in our individual conversations along the way. I picked your brains about what goals you all had in mind. Tonight, we're talking a little bit about potential goals and format and the way I've kind of structured things for us. And then June 15th, my hope is that we're able to approve goals for the school district for the upcoming school year. And then July 20th, approve some key performance measures. And I'm going to explain what those 2 things are. So just a reminder real quickly, these are our current goals as stand. We had 6 goals that we've had over the past few years. And it wasn't a indictment on goals in any way, shape, or form. The question that I think I had for you all as a board was, do these goals reflect what our current board wants to see for our organization moving into the upcoming year? These goals have served us extremely well in the past. And I think they're pretty consistent that you see in a lot of districts around the state. Obviously some different words, but that idea of some of these districts or some of the themes in these goals are seen in many districts throughout the state. In asking you all for some feedback, I asked you for feedback in 2 specific areas. 1, on transformations that you wanted to see throughout our system. And then 2, the specific feedback on House Bill 3 and those academic measures types things. So talking real specifically about transformation to start. And these are my words, and I used your feedback to help create these. So this is a perfect time for you to weigh in as a board. If you don't feel like some of your voice was captured in some of these statements, feel free to weigh in, please, because we want to get it right. But feedback that I heard from you all is that we do want to be able to chart our course for the future, that we do want to develop some kind of a graduate profile and a plan to help us really get there and achieve those things, because that helps set direction for the school district. That we want to reimagine learning for students, and we've been propelled to do that through COVID this year, but that also we want to create this idea of clear and predictable pathways for kids that are based on their passion and their joy and something that really interests them for the future. And we want to create those opportunities for our students, but we also want to make sure that we have maybe more flexible learning environments. This COVID pandemic has made us really question how we're going to be able to deliver a high quality instructional product, no matter whether we're face-to-face or in a remote type setting. So really thinking through what kind of online learning options we might have. And then that third one, create a thriving culture for each and every student, and talking specifically about cultural diversity and how we meet the needs of each and every one of our students in our system. We know that given the current times that we're in right now, we have a lot of listening and learning to do. And I know that as a white male superintendent, one of the goals that I have, one of the commitments that I have is that I'm leading for each and every student in the system. And so that means being able to listen, learn, and really think through how we are hearing all of the voices for all of our students that we serve. And we got some feedback specifically on House Bill 3 and Senate Bill 1566 type requirements from y'all. And you know that those goals that we have to develop as a board are very SMART goal format, target driven, you know, how we're increasing some things. And so I asked you, what are your initial thoughts on some of that? For the early literacy ideas, that idea of using data to ensure growth of students, it's really about growth rather than just a target measure. The idea that we need to program, to tailor our programs to meet the needs of the kids in our system versus the other way around. Sometimes school districts get so locked into, hey, this is the program that we offer, that it's not actually meeting the needs of some of our students. So the feedback that we receive from you is, let's really make sure that whatever we're offering for our kids in early literacy, that it's designed to do things like close that vocabulary gap that we know some of our kids have based on their experiences, maybe in the home environment. And then lastly, that idea of third and fifth grade, that there are some key years that really matter a lot that we need to monitor very closely. And that it was suggested that we take a look specifically at third and fifth grade. Math, that idea, and I've heard this in other districts as well. We want to cultivate a love of math and an enjoyment in math, as opposed to the other mindset that is created sometimes. And what I'll use in this is, it's not okay as a societal standard to be able to go out and say often, hey, I'm not literate and I don't read well. But yet it's become okay in our societies to be able to say, I'm not a math person. And so the challenge that we want to say in all of this is that we want to grow and develop a love of learning and math, just like we work to grow and develop a love of learning and reading in literacy. And so that idea that students are still interested in enjoying math, I think, was a big piece of that feedback. The focus on third and fifth grade again came up. And then finally, the college career and military readiness. One of the key things in all of this is these ideas of pathways for kids again came up, and being able to say, as a student, your pathway to your future career might not just be a four-year institution. It might be you graduate with a certification in an industry that you're passionate about, such as some kind of ASE certification for auto shop. And then you might go to a 2-year program at one of the community colleges that helps you develop even deeper into that. And you might go beyond that. But the whole idea is that there's a pathway that continues beyond the learning experience in Belton ISD that allows kids to really pursue their hopes and dreams for the future, and that we would somehow measure some key elements along the way, like industry certifications that we would want to produce for Belton ISD. So I'm going to pause there real quickly, and those are the 2 feedback slides that y'all gave me. Did I capture those things from your perspective that you all wanted me to capture in your feedback.
From my perspective, you did. Go ahead, Janet. I'm sorry.
I think you did really well. I would say after I submitted my thoughts, I kind of thought to myself, another piece of early literacy that I think is so important, and we've had some discussion community-wide on this, not just through the school district, but through some other things I've been involved in, is really encouraging people in some of our demographic areas to get their kids signed up for pre-K. And I think that is a huge piece to early literacy, especially in some of our groups that are really struggling and continue to lag behind other groups. So we got to get, and if there can be an initiative to help, like some of our families that are already here that have little ones coming up, just really push pre-K for those families.
Great.
Thank you, Janet. Anyone else?
Yes, Chris. So on the prior slide on the transformation, we maybe dug into this a little bit in the last policy committee meeting. So it's really kind of a recent conversation. But in the reimagine the learning experience for students, I think, almost as a sub-bullet of finding the gold nuggets that exist, like at a new tech, right, or Belton High School that the rest of the student body can benefit from, and just identifying those. Like, maybe it's probably too lofty of a goal to identify and implement those, right? But at least start creating that inventory of those nuggets that we can use to then export those things to the other campuses.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I remember that discussion vividly. Anyone else with any, did we capture in your feedback that y'all had submitted to me?
Yeah. Hey, Matt.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean, we did, and you and I spoke at length about this. I guess one of my concerns, kind of looking forward, is, and I made some notes, was on the idea of the programs. We're offering the programs that we need, but then something you said when we interviewed with you is, are we laying program on top of program without doing away with some programs? I know a few years ago, we still were doing like one of our C-Tech was medical coding, I believe, in which someone finally told them, medical coding won't even exist, X amount of years from now. So we really don't need to be teaching it. That's one of my things is, how do I identify the programs that work, keep bringing those, but then cut the other ones so we're not laying stuff on teachers. And then, well, how do we make math fun? That's just a question. I really don't know. I enjoy math, but you enjoy reading literature and Ty doesn't, so I don't know how that works. And then the other ones we can measure. The 3rd and 5th grade is very measurable. We can look back, although we hate to rely on the test. It is a goalpost that we can look at, and it helps in that manner. It's not the end all be all, but it is measurable. But the CCMR and finding the pathways and getting the students to go down that road, how do we measure that at the end? How do we measure, are we helping these students, find their way? And I'm just curious how we're going to measure it.
Yeah, I'll dive into that in just a couple of minutes. I think those are really good points, Jeff. And I do think you just brought up something that I don't think I accurately captured in some of this, and it's good feedback before we get to an adoption process. And that's the idea of program evaluation and how we really don't just keep adding on as a school district, but how we refine and improve. If we want to keep a program, it's about refinement and improvement. If we want to move forward in a different direction, then we have to be able to make those decisions sometimes. When it comes specifically to the idea of pathways and programs for kids, I think there's a few ways to look at it. First is the idea of high wage, high demand jobs for the future. And what are we creating programs that set kids up for success in those areas? But there's also one other key component in that is that they have to be of interest to kids. And so those two things have to go hand in hand, because we can offer the best program in the world, but if we don't get any kids that sign up for it, we're shooting ourselves in the foot, right? And so, I've talked to Stephanie Ferguson about this, and she's helping us do some key studying of some of our CTE programs and pathways. And I think we have to keep looking at the programs that we're offering, and do they align with that high wage, high demand job for the future? And also, do they align with interests of our kids? And we're going to have to dive into how do we figure that one out.
Hey, Matt.
Yes, sir.
I guess two things on there. I'm kind of with Jeff on the math thing. Having 3 high school kids around here for the last few years, I think some of our kids get put into math classes that they probably shouldn't, because their career path has nothing to do with some of these upper level maths that they're put on in these programs. And I don't think they see the relevancy for some of that. One of the things I've heard, I think all 3 of them talk about, is a class that talks about interest rates, balancing your checkbook, about the way money works in our society, those type of things, more realistic, buying a car, credit cards, some of those type of things. I think that's something maybe to look at. And then the other thing that concerns me with this new style of learning that we've been forced to be in is I've been observing 2 high school kids and a college kid that are doing everything through computer. And I hope we're not moving towards this as being a norm in the future. I don't see how we're gaining a lot by our kids not being in the classroom setting with our teachers and with their peers, and doing project-based learning in some cases and things. I just don't know if I've been a real big fan of them sitting at home by themselves on a computer. I don't know that that's the best path. So I hope that's not really where we're moving with schools. I know we had to do it this time because of the pandemic, but I'm not sure that I really like it, at least not at the junior high school level myself.
So my communications team might kill me on this one, but I may show you all a little document that they created for me earlier today based on a discussion we had. And Ty, I think what you're referencing is we're in a real interesting challenge right now. And one of the things that we're going to discuss next week in our board agenda coming up on COVID type stuff is this idea of what the learning environment is going to look like for the future. And to your point real quickly, I don't think that an online only learning environment helps teach the critical skills that we need to develop in kids. I do think there is collaboration and communication skills that we really need to start to focus on. And sometimes the online learning environment, I don't think is conducive to that. But one of the things that we're challenging ourselves as a learning organization to do is, in the past, there was one constant in all of this, and that's school would be face-to-face. And so everybody would come every day and they'd be face-to-face with kids, and the kids would interact with their teachers. And if you had a kid out with mono for 3 weeks that was in your own house, their learning experience varied drastically, because when they were home trying to do work on their own, they weren't with their teacher face-to-face, and they weren't getting all the support that they felt that you might have felt they needed as a parent. What we're really trying to do right now is flip that mindset for the future, and saying that there is a constant, and that constant is going to be the quality of the learning experience for kids, but that we might have to figure out a way to deliver that if school is closed because of a pandemic, and also if we're face-to-face with kids. And so that's the real challenge that we have right now, is that if we end up being closed at all in the future, for whatever reason, let's say that there is an outbreak in the fall, that we have some kind of a quality level that everybody feels comfortable with, and it still stresses those skills that you're bringing up right now that you feel like, it's a struggle for people. So we've got a big task ahead of us, and I look forward to talking more about that. But your point, I think, is really a good one. What we saw in this remote learning environment right now this spring was nothing short of outstanding from our teachers and from our administrators, and I am entirely proud of that. But I don't think it is the answer long-term for our kids, and we gotta keep working on that.
So Matt, I want to just mention 2 things. One is that the Senate Bill 1566 really talked about military readiness, and I think we don't often have that discussion as part of our board meetings. So, and I think that that's something that maybe is easily overlooked by some of our families in terms of options. And then I want to go back and I want to thank you for the work on early literacy. And I agree 100% with Janet on the importance of making sure that we're getting our families into pre-K, but I think I want to stress that there's a big population out there that we are missing, that we have to figure out how can we create the outreach so that those families feel heard and welcomed and safe coming to the school, because it's just such a vital part of the education all the way up.
Thank you, Rosie. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what these goals are going to look like and what I'm going to ask you to actually consider for adoption next week. So what you'll see in the following slides are a couple of goals. And then underneath, you're going to see in parentheses, or excuse me, in italics, you're going to see key progress measures. So next week, when we have our board meeting, I'm going to ask you to consider adopting 5 goals, and they're big, broad statements that point us in a direction. And they're a little bit like some of the things that you see on our website right now. They're revised a little bit, you'll see, but they're big, broad statements along the way. And if we adopt those goals, then the next step our administrative team would have is to really identify and articulate what those progress measures would be. And so under each goal, what are we going to measure to see if we're actually moving those things forward? So, example. Potential district goal, number 1, engage the community in setting direction for the future of BISD. And so that is a goal that I'm going to ask you to consider for next week. We can wordsmith it if you want. Feedback is more than welcome. But then in July, we're going to present to you, if you adopt those, we're going to present to you some key measures, and we're going to put some completion of tasks on there and some numbers on there for you to be able to say, okay, as a board, we believe that if we do these things, we'll have made substantial progress in engaging the community and setting direction for the future of BISD. Second one, ensure exceptional learning experiences for each and every student. So here's where you would find, if we adopt this goal in July, you would actually approve some clear measures that we have for House Bill 3 in early literacy, math, and college career and military readiness. Is you're going to hear a little bit about from Vicki and Deanna in a few minutes. And another example in this is we could say something like, by May of 2020, we'll have completed a communication plan about the offerings and options that every student in Belton ISD has available to them. And so there's very specific targets that we would say, yes, by doing these things or by seeing progress in these areas, we'll have made substantial progress toward that goal. The third one, you've spent a lot of time talking about already tonight, but that's the idea of attract, retain, and support a world-class team of employees. And that's the idea of really trying to make sure that we have some progress measures from an HR standpoint. And it might be that y'all decide as a board, hey, we need to be competitive in the market in all salary scales in all areas. It might be that we are measuring and monitoring the professional learning system that we have out there, and that we're able to say that all of our employees have received the required trainings and support that they need. So those are, again, potential key progress measures. The fourth, develop a district-wide culture of value, support, and growth amongst all students and staff. And this goes back to the idea of a positive culture for the district. And I think that that is one of those things that I heard you as a board talk loudly about back in January when we first met, and that we have a lot to be proud of in Belton ISD. We want to make sure that all of our students and all of our staff feel like they're a part of the Big Red community. And there are certain things that we want to hold tight in all of this. And I think that this goal would capture that one. And then 5, maximize our use of resources for both current priorities and plans for the future. And that's where we start talking about budget and facilities and making sure that all of these resources that we have at our hands are used to achieve those goals that you determine are important as a board of trustees. So again, June 15th, what I would ask you to do is we're going to bring an item to you, if you all feel comfortable with it, to consider these 5 goals for the upcoming school year. And I agree they might not be perfect, but I think it's a starting point for us along the way. And then in July, if you approve these goals, in July, we will come back to you as a leadership team and say, under each one of these, here's what we believe are key progress measures based on your feedback along the way and based on what we have in front of us that would really help us monitor our progress toward those goals for the year. Are there any questions that y'all have on the format of this or what we're potentially doing moving forward?
Go ahead, Ty.
Yeah, Matt, on the goal number 2, the MR part of it, the military readiness, what's our status on the core at the new high school? I know we'd applied for that. Did we get that? How are we doing on that?
You know, Ty, I'm going to have to check because I got a communication about 2 months ago on that one, and I can't remember off the top of my head. I don't want to misspeak. I believe that, well, I know we're in progress because I got a communication on it, but I can't tell you exactly where we stand right now. So I'm going to have to get back to you. I apologize.
I think these are, this is a good place to start. I like the idea that y'all are going to come back just within a month to kind of outline those needed bullet points under each one. Does the board have any other questions or thoughts regarding that?
So what I'd like to do is I'd like to turn it over to Deanna and Vicki real quick, because I know as trustees, you've been through these trainings on Senate Bill 1566 and House Bill 3 requirements that I think are really important for you to make sure that you're hitting those targets. And they have a plan kind of all worked out for some of those key requirements. Again, we won't ask you for approval on these until July, but I wanted to make sure that you knew kind of what we were thinking through moving forward on this one. Vicki and Deanna, I'll turn it over to you for a few minutes.
Okay, I need the ability to share my screen. If somebody can give me that.
I think I can do that. There you go.
Great, got it. Thank you. So this is a requirement out of House Bill 3 to write 3 goals and action plans for early childhood reading. That's goal 1. For math, goal 2, and then for CCMR. And with that, it's a smart, the requirement is to have a SMART goal, to have a goal that spans over 5 years and is based on, for early childhood reading and math, is based on 3rd grade STAR scores. So Vicki is going to start by showing you our early literacy and our math goals. And she'll break down what data we would plan to use to meet those goals based on our last STAR performance data, which was 2019.
Hey, good evening. So for our early literacy outcome goals, so we set 2 goals for literacy and then for math based on, like Deanna said, on the 3rd grade STAR scores. So since we aren't going to have scores from this year, we based it on the 2019 3rd grade scores, which we were at 48% at the MEETS level. And if you remember back to your training, there are 3 levels: approaches, meets, and masters. And the House Bill 3 requires that we write the goal around the MEETS level, not the approaches level, because MEETS means you're at grade level. And so it also states that 60% of our students need to be at that level in 5 years. And so our SMART goal is based on that. And starting out from last year, we were already above the state, which the state was at 45%, and we were at 48%. So one of the things around House Bill 3 is they want you to progress measure. How are we doing over time? So looking at pre-K students, how are they performing when they're leaving pre-K? And then those pre-Kers, how are they performing when they go to kindergarten, 1st grade and 2nd grade? So then therefore we can be able to progress measure, are we going to meet our goal in those 5 years? And so we have different assessments for literacy at each grade level. So in pre-K, we use what the state has approved, the CIRCLE
progress measure literacy diagnostic, which you might hear is CLI Engage. It's called Circle. It's a state approved assessment. In kindergarten, we have what we call the Texas Kindergarten Entry Assessment system. And we would look at how many students are on track when they leave kindergarten, as well as pre-K. And then in first grade, we switch over to another assessment, and we've been utilizing Star Renaissance Early Literacy Assessment. And then that assessment, we will be looking at how many students are on grade level for reading when they leave first grade. And then in second grade, those students move over to taking the Renaissance Star Reading Assessment. And we would be looking at, well, how many students are on grade level for when they leave second grade. So in order to look at, therefore, then how are they going to perform in third grade? So for math, it's same thing. We're looking at how are students going to perform over in June 2024, increasing from 51% to 60%. We were higher than the state in 2019, where the state was at 49%. So the same thing, we would progress measure pre-kindergarten students going to kindergarten. How are they performing when they get to kindergarten, to first grade, to second grade? And we utilize the same assessments, but looking at those assessments on the math side. So looking at, are they on track to perform where they need to be in kindergarten? Are they on track when they leave kindergarten to go to first grade? When they leave first grade, are we on grade level in math? And then the same thing with second grade. So, so as you can see, I think one of the difference as we're looking at how we're going to be tracking our students over time, where sometimes when we look at STAR data, third grade every year is a little differently, but we'll be tracking our same students over time and making sure we're growing them as they leave pre-K. Are we growing them as they go to first grade and as they go to second grade? So it has the growth mindset, which I had mentioned earlier in your board goals, that that's what y'all want to be looking at. Are we growing students to be successful when they get to third grade and when they leave that third grade?
Do any of these measures take into consideration the fact that we may have lost some groundwork because of COVID-19? Have you all talked about contingencies and how to stay on track with that?
Well, we haven't, so this is kind of an overview. We haven't met as a team, and then I think that's what's going to happen in July. What do we want our percent of students on track to be in kindergarten? What do we want our students to be? What percent do we want that magic number when they leave kindergarten? And I know our department, we've been working since the beginning of May of looking at all our curriculum and what adjustments do we need to make, what assessments, how are we going to assess students when they get to school, to see what gaps we have that and what do we need to do to ensure that those gaps don't impact how students perform when they leave at the end of 2021.
Thanks, Vicki.
And I'll say one thing on that one. I think it's fascinating a little bit the situation that we find ourselves in, because I hear some of my fellow superintendents around the state that are saying things like, well, the kids are going to show up with gaps next year, and how do we do this? And I want to remind those superintendents often that we teach kids, not content. And what I mean by that is that it's our job from that pre-K to 12 to help students grow as learners and to get the necessary experiences along the way. And that if we think that those students are coming to us in a deficit mindset this next year, and we got a problem already on that one. I think one of the things that I think I'm really most proud of in all of this is that we're able to work through some of these things and say, here's where we want to be, but we know that learning is a continuum for kids, and that there are some students that are going to progress more rapidly and some are more slowly depending on their own learning needs. And I think we have to keep that in mind in all of this, that these targets, you're going to hear me get on my soapbox again real quickly, these targets are pretty arbitrary based on what the state is saying. Hey, y'all have to have some of these things. And the commissioner threw out, Deanna and Vicky, if I'm not mistaken, 60%, right? So just being real honest, you know, some of these things are thrown out there in an arbitrary learning environment for some of our kids. My hope is that throughout the years, the next couple of decades that we're all working together, that we really lay out, hey, this is the trajectory that we want for kids in Belton ISD. And I hear those targets that the state throws out there, but they're a little arbitrary on some things. And I'm not going to tell our kids and our parents in Belton that they're behind the ball game based on some of those targets that have been arbitrarily thrown out there. So sorry, I'll be quiet now.
That's fine. Thank you.
So I'll pick up from there before I go to CCMR, and I'll just echo, in presenting this to you tonight, we were really thoughtful in our approach because the templates that we were given were filled with charts and charts of arbitrary numbers where you just guessed for every year what you might be. And I think what the message is that we are intentional in sending is that we do have to focus on each and every student. And that starts in the early childhood and in the reading and the math, and saying, you know, at our pre-K, we need you to really focus on who is on track, who's not on track, and provide those interventions. And if we do that and we do that well, and we continue to make progress, then the numbers do work out. But we really want to send that message. What are we looking at for each student? So that brings me to the CCMR component. So with CCMR, you're looking at all of your students and which of the CCMR criteria they meet. And your goal is that you have 100%. You want every student to meet at least one of those progress measures. And so there are more than are listed on this chart, but these are the ones that we can intentionally make sure we're addressing within our system. For instance, TSI, we're providing in the next, this summer, we're giving those assessments to students and making sure that they're performing in reading and math on level prepared for college. Our AP exams, our students just took those, you know, really intentionally looking at who is in those classes and if they are choosing to take a test, and if not, why, and supporting them. Our dual credit, and we talked about it, our policy committee, and we'll be adding on ramps. That's another measure, that another opportunity for our students to earn either dual credit or dual enrollment while in college. Our industry-based certifications tied to our CTE pathways. We have students that are at TBI for their associate's degree. So making sure with each and every student, is that something that they want to pursue? Did we get them in that program? For our students with special needs, making sure that they've completed their IEP and they're workforce ready. And then our military readiness. So we do have a robust ROTC program. You do not have to be in the ROTC program to go into the military. However, there's a lot of advantages. If you are, you will enter the military at a higher level. And so really making sure our students know all these opportunities, and that our counselors, our high school counselors, as they're guiding these students, they're working with each and every one to plug them in and make sure that their needs are being met for their future plans. And so this is our goal. We have our goal is to increase from 61% to 77%. 61, I'll tell you, I believe was low. That was the first year it came out, and some of it was a little retroactive. We were anticipating this year to show some significant growth in that area, and then life took an unexpected turn, but we're still going to use that number to move forward to increase to a minimum of 77% in 5 years.
Thank you, Deanna. Thank you, Vicky. I think as a board, we share those things with you tonight as examples, because I do know when we started getting into the discussion on goals, specifically about the measures and what's the board role in assigning those measures and stuff. There's a lot of detail behind it. So I think in our goal process, again, going back to what we're going to be asking of you is at the next board meeting, we're going to ask you to approve goals for the upcoming year, meaning those big, broad statements that I outlined earlier. And then over the next month, if you approve those goals, we are going to dive into the key measures along the way and have you approve those in July. And by doing that, I think we'll be able to say that the board has been able to provide strategic feedback along the way to develop all of the goals for Belton ISD for the upcoming school year. So I think that kind of wraps us up for today. If you have any questions, comments, or thoughts for us in this.
We certainly appreciate the approach and getting the information to us. This is very valuable. Does the board have any other comments or questions? I think we're all good.
I want to thank Ty Taggart for helping Matt Smith decorate his office.
Tiger.
Point that out. I have a tiger on the shelf behind me right now, and that's all thanks to Ty Taggart. So
thanks, Ty.
Hey, Ty, where's the Bronco, buddy?
Working on it. I was hoping your kids would make one, you know, all their spare time. Paper mache is cool. Hey, I just want to say thank you to Deanna and Vicky. Thanks y'all again for doing what you do. And Matt, thank you for this new environment of including everybody from board to administration to teachers to community to put this vision together. It's being recognized around the district. I saw some comments today on someone's thread. I just want to thank you for this new vision of inclusion. It makes everybody, the whole team, stronger when you're getting all this feedback from top to bottom. So I do appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate that. I will tell you this, I couldn't have done anything without the leadership of our leadership team here. There's a phenomenal group here, and I'm very thankful for everything that they've done. And I'm thankful for you all as a board in allowing me to work with this amazing team. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, if we have nothing further, it's 6:47 and we are adjourned. Thanks, guys.